Well, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to our July webinar, Lunch and Learn webinar. Nice to see so many connected this afternoon as well. So really appreciate the time you've put aside for us today. And if you're rewatching this on YouTube, well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. So the purpose of these Lunch and Learn webinars is really to help you get the most from your Microsoft tools and also to teach you and your people in your business good IT and good cybersecurity practices. Now, if you haven't seen any of our webinars before or you've missed some, you can catch up on all of them on our YouTube channel. You'll find that our YouTube channel name is at PSTech MSP. So, introduce myself. I am Paul Stanier. I'm one of the directors at PS Tech. We are your IT experts, and we help businesses across the UK and globally as well with their IT and cybersecurity needs. Now, one of our specialist areas is helping businesses to set up Microsoft 365 in a secure way, and then getting continual safety and security from that environment. Now, today's webinar is on a practical subject. We're going to be talking about Microsoft Excel. And you'll notice on the slide you saw when you joined, this is part one of Excel Pro tips. And the second part will run in a few months' time. So what are we going to cover in the next 30 minutes? Well, my aim is to try and show you something you don't already know. And hopefully you can take that away and benefit from that. This won't be a complete list of Excel features and tips. There are just so many. So this is just part one, as we only have a few minutes. So I'm going to quickly share a slide, which will just show some of the things that we are going to cover in the next few moments. So we're going to be starting with time-saving tips about how to move around your Excel sheets quickly and efficiently. We're going to be looking at some great ways where you can select, move, and copy and paste data around your sheet. I'm going to show you a couple of really awesome tools that you can use within your worksheet to perform calculations quickly or analyze data quickly. We're also going to look at a couple of ways where you can format data to make it less noisy or try and highlight key data that you want to see. And then finally, we're going to take a look at a feature of Excel called Power Query. This is a really powerful way to import data from multiple sources, to format that data and present it in a way that is useful, but then to make that process repeatable really quickly. So we're going to be cramming today. So let's get started. I'm going to jump over to my virtual computer here, a nice beach scene. Hopefully you're planning your holiday soon as well. So let's open up Microsoft Excel. And I'm going to actually open up a sheet that I had earlier. Here we go. Okay, so we've got a spreadsheet here. The first thing I want to show you in Excel actually is not an Excel feature. It's a reminder. This is something you can do in any of the Microsoft Office apps. You can press F1 on your keyboard, and that brings up the help. And when you're in the help panel here on the right-hand side, when it finally loads, you can search the help. You can search in here for keyboard shortcuts. And it comes up as one of the suggestions. When we press on that help article there, we get, for a comprehensive list, see keyboard shortcuts in Excel. It's an article that Microsoft have written. And in here, if you've got the time to scroll down, you'll find there is a gazillion shortcuts that you can use to access the menus and some of the functions. Let me jump onto a couple of navigation points. So a little tip here on your keyboard. Now, if you're using a desktop computer, this key will be quite clearly marked in the middle section where your page up, page down keys just above there, and it's called scroll lock. Now, on a laptop, you may have to press a combination. So I've got a virtual keyboard here on screen, and you can see here, this is how it's indicated here. Now in Excel, scroll lock acts like a toggle. When you press it once, it changes the way you move around your worksheet. So if I just press into a cell somewhere, at the moment I can use my cursor keys to navigate left and right and up and down through my sheet. When I press the scroll lock key on my keyboard once, that now when I press the down arrow, the entire sheet is scrolling down. And when I push up on my arrow, the entire sheet scrolls up. If I press scroll lock again to turn that feature off, I'm back to my normal cell navigation. So you may find that useful when moving around a sheet rather than having to use the slidey bars here on the right or at the bottom. Let's move on to another navigation tip. So when we're in our spreadsheet, using on the keyboard the control key. So in the bottom left and the bottom right, you'll see the keys there, CTRL. Okay. When you hold that down and press the end button on your keyboard, it will jump to the very last cell of data in your sheet. And if I just move down and move right, you'll see there is nothing below and there is nothing past that. So Control End moves to the last cell. On a very large sheet, that can be very useful. Control and Home moves you back to the very first cell. So it's a way of jumping to that top left corner or bottom right corner of your sheet. Okay, a couple of other keyboard shortcuts. A key that's worth remembering in Excel is Control and Z. Now, Control and Z is your undo the last action. So if I accidentally delete a cell, for example, and I think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. On my keyboard, I press Control or hold down Control and tap the Z key, and that comes back. But it will keep undoing the previous actions. So as you make actions through your spreadsheet, you'll be able to undo actions that have been done in the past. So it keeps a log of those, so you can very quickly go back a few steps if you need to. On the flip side, you might want to redo a function. So you can use the Control and Y key. So a simple example might be, I want to make this bold, so I'll make that bold. If I move down to the next cell, if I press Control and Y, this is not a good example, it makes it bold. And the same again. So Control B is also bold. But if I was pasting a fill color or changing the font on a block of cells, I could repeat that formatting action with Control and Y. If I press Control Z a few times, it undoes those things I just did there. Now, when you're navigating, we talked about how you can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move around your cells. You can use the Control and Shift key, and then using one of the cursor keys, I'm going to use the down arrow to select data. So rather than using your mouse and dragging down to select some data, you can use your keyboard. Holding down Shift, I select individual cells. By holding down Control as well, I select the entire data set down to the end of the data that's there. And the same would happen as well if I did that going right. Shift and right selects data. Control, Shift and right moves across in chunks all the way to the end of my data there. Okay. I want to show you just a little good feature here. If I go to this tab here, best performing, and I've started to fill in my locations that sell these different products, the best performing location. Now, this is a manual task I'm doing this as, not as data analysis, but I want to show you a great feature by using the Alt and down arrow key. When I press that, I get a selection, a consolidated selection of the data that is above to choose from. So I can choose one of my store names very quickly here, Alt and down. I can pick that rather than typing it in for me. Now, if I've got Brighton listed multiple times, which I do now, it's listed twice there. When I press Alt and down again, I only see it once. So this is like a consolidated list of content. So it saves you creating what we call data validation or name ranges. That's something we'll cover in a future episode. Okay, let's now go back to our main data page here. So we can select entire columns using the column letters above here. And when I click on those, it selects the entire column. But another way that you can do that is using the Control and Space key. So whatever column you're in, if you tap Control and Space, it will select the entire column. But the same applies as well. If I want to select a row, if I press Shift and Space, that will select the entire row. Now, sometimes we want to insert a row or a column. So a way you might do that is to select the column and right-click and go Insert. But another way you can do that, when you mix this with the Control and Space for column or Shift and Space for rows, you can insert columns or rows using another keyboard shortcut. So let's select our column with Control and Shift. I want to insert a column here. And now I press Control, Shift, and on my keyboard, I press the += key. So we're talking about this little key just here. So when I do that, Control, Shift, +=, I've now inserted a column. But the same would apply if I had a row selected as well. Control and Shift with Alt and with equals and plus, and I insert a row there. Let's undo that. Control Z twice. Okay. Now, another thing we can do is move data around our spreadsheet. Now, before we do that, I just want to show you one little thing as well. If I jump back to one of my other sheets here, you'll see here, in this column here, I've got best performing location, but the words don't fit inside the cell because I've got another cell next to it with data in. So I need to make that column wider, don't I? Now, the way I would do that with the mouse, I'd move my mouse up between B and C, and my cursor changes to a little expander type icon here. And now when I hold down my left mouse button, I can drag and I can expand that column to make it fit. But rather than dragging, you can just double click. So if I just double click on the column, it will automatically fit the column to the correct width based on the cell with the most data in. So if I do the same here, I'm just going to replace this with an awful lot of data in this cell. And when I double click on the divider here between C and D, it will expand the entire column to fit that. And that, if you're using a trackpad on a laptop, sometimes those little minute adjustments here when you're dragging can be quite fiddly. So just double tapping in spaces can really save you some time. Okay, let's look at how we can drag data around a spreadsheet. So I'm going to undo my my changes here so we get our header back here. Now I can move data around very quickly. So you can select some cells here. And when you move your mouse over the perimeter here, the black edges of that box here, the cursor changes to a little crosshair. When I hold down my left mouse button, I can now drag that data to wherever it goes. Now, if there's any formulas or formatting, that goes with it as well. So it's a complete cut and paste, really, when you drag that way. But there are other ways you can move data around as well. For instance, if I hold down the control key on the keyboard and move my mouse over that little line again, notice how it's no longer a crosshair, it's an arrow with a plus icon. This will allow me to duplicate this data. So I'm still holding down control on my keyboard. I'm now going to drag this to here, and I've now got a duplicate of that data. And that can be very useful when you're sort of taking multiple copies of data that you want to perform different sets of analysis on or present in different ways. Another way you can do this is with the Shift key. So when you do this with the Shift key, I'm going to drag copy some data from here. When I move my mouse over there, I've got the crosshair. But now when I use the Shift key, I get a completely different presentation. So I can choose where the data is going to sit. So I can have it aligned right there. When I let go, it kind of moves it to there. If I hold down the Shift key again, I can do it based on a column. So it's giving me like a nice visual aid as to where the data is going to sit after I've moved it. And notice as well how it's also shifted the data to the left here as well. So it's inserted as well as moved as well. Now be aware when you do that, this overwrites whatever's in those cells. So if you're dragging on top of something, it won't insert, it will overwrite. Okay. And one final little tip here with moving and copying of data, and that is the Control, Shift, and V. I'm not going to demonstrate this, but when you paste with Control V, that copies everything in that cell that has been copied, which has been copied. That could be formatting, formulas, text, all sorts of things. When you do Control, Shift, and V, then that only lifts the values. So whatever the number, whatever the word, whatever the string of text might be, just that content is moved, not the formula as well. You can use that keyboard shortcut in other apps, Word, Microsoft Edge, and so on. It's very useful when, for instance, copying data from a web page into a Word document or into an Excel sheet, you lose all that formatting. So you don't want that. You just want the words or you just want the numbers. Okay. So one final thing which we're going to cover in a future episode is paste special. So again, let's just copy some data. Now on the toolbar, you have paste here, the little drop down arrow. When I click on there, I've got various options. There's paste values, that's Control, Shift, and V. But if I click on paste special down the bottom here, I get lots of options where I can paste my data, just the formulas, just the values, just the formatting. I can transpose, which means that this data would be flipped to a row rather than a column, and so on. I can paste links and so forth. Now, we're going to cover this in another future session, but the keyboard shortcut to get to paste special, if you don't like using the mouse, is Alt plus E, and then you press S on the keyboard while holding down the Alt key still, and that brings up paste special. Alt, E, and S. Okay. Let's look at how we can do some quick calculations, quick time check. Okay, so I've got here a spreadsheet where I want to add up the column of sales and gross profit here. Now I could type into my cell it equals sum, open bracket, and then I can select the cells that I want to total and so on. There is a quicker way, and that is using what's called the auto sum tool. So the auto sum can be accessed in one of two ways. There is a button on the home tab up here, auto sum, or on your keyboard, you just press Alt and equals. So Alt on my keyboard and the equal symbol, and automatically inserts equals sum. I've got my open bracket and my close bracket. I now just need to select the data that I want to calculate, and my sum is there. Okay. And final thing about filling in data, so that's auto sum. If I jump to my salesperson's sheet here, I want to show you something called flash fill. So flash fill allows you to fill, Excel kind of tries to work out what data you're trying to complete. So I've got a list of salespeople here from my stores. I've got first name and surname, but I want to join those together into one cell. So if I just type in once, Emily Smith, like so, and press enter, I've now got Emily. Now remember this keyboard shortcut, Control and E. Now when I press Control and E, straight away Excel's worked out from the cell above that I just completed that I'm looking to join these two cells here to make a full name. So straight away I've got accurately and correctly here the full name of those people. And these are not formulas, these are text, so you can copy and paste that to wherever you need and use it that way. We'll cover flash fill in more detail in a future session, but it's a super great tip. Control plus E, and it will help you to fill in all sorts of data, not just your usual numbers, days, weeks, and months. All right. Now, sometimes when you've got a spreadsheet open, you sometimes have too much data. And it might be a tendency to hide some data so that you don't want to see some of the numbers that are behind some of the key information that's being presented. And there's a feature in Excel, if I highlight these columns here, if I right click, I have the option to hide these. Now, hiding is a nuisance because you can't really see that they're not there. And to get them back, it's a bit of a fiddle. I have to sort of select these rows here and choose unhide. And it's not very clear that they're available. There's a better way of doing this, and that's called a feature called grouping. So let's do the same again. I'm going to select my three columns that are here. And if I jump to the data menu on my ribbon toolbar, you'll see here that there is under outline here on the right, group. Now, when I group those columns together, we get a little thing above here with a little line showing these three columns kind of joined together. And I can hit the minus symbol to just collapse them. But if I want them back, I can just hit the plus button. It's a lot quicker than selecting the columns either side and choosing unhide. Now, if I want to ungroup, again, I select my columns, I can ungroup from here. And you can do exactly the same as well with rows. If I group these rows together, you'll find here on the left-hand side, I've got my encapsulation bar, and I can collapse and expand those rows to make them visible or invisible, far quicker than using hide and unhide. And one final thing about formatting data is something called conditional formatting. And this would be a 2-hour session just on its own, but I'll just show you the power of conditional formatting. I'm going to select my column here, product. And on the home tab, you'll see here is the conditional formatting button. Now, when I press on the conditional formatting button, I get a number of different possible options that I might want to do. I might want to highlight some cells. I might want to highlight cells that are the top this or the bottom that. If these are numbers, I might want to do some nice charts or scales or show some icons to show where things have increased or decreased and so on. And there's ways of manually creating your own rules as well. So very simply, I'm just going to highlight the duplicate values. And when I do that, I get a little box pop up here, duplicate is what it's looking for. And it's going to, the formatting is going to be light red with a dark red text. And I can change that formatting to whatever I want. I can make it green if I want to. And when I press OK, it's highlighted that rollerblades and tennis balls are actually duplicated on this sheet. Now, that's something I want to fix because this is misreporting my data. Someone's reported twice the sales figures for these two types of product. So it's a quick way of identifying products or lines of data that may meet a certain criteria, but duplicate is just one option. Okay, we've just got a few minutes to go. I want to show you Power Query, and this is very exciting. So I'm going to just close my spreadsheet here and close this one as well. And what I want to do is just want to start with a blank sheet. Another nice summer view there. I don't know if anyone's been there before. I'm going to start my Excel with a blank worksheet. Okay. Now, I'm a business owner, and sometimes, unfortunately, things impact our pricing. It may be we've got to put some of our prices up to cater for inflation. It may be our costs have gone up around rent or products, people, and so on. Now, obviously, I don't want to be ripping my customers off. How do I see, for instance, what the current inflation rate is within the UK? What are the trends and so on? Well, I could go to the internet, and here's one I baked earlier. This is the Office for National Statistics. And they have a page where you can search for inflation figures for the UK. And this is the page it will bring you to. And they've got data going right back to 1989, probably before some of you were even born. And as you can see, inflation was very high back then as well. But really, does all this data help me to decide what my current pricing should be for next year, for example? Well, really, what I'm only interested in maybe is the trend over the last 2 or 3 years. So this data is in graph form on this website, but fortunately, the Office for National Statistics do provide the data in a CSV or Excel format. But we're not going to do that. This page URL doesn't change. The Office for National Statistics keep it the same. I can connect Excel Power Query to this page to pull this information in live, and as they start adding new statistics, then Excel can be updated automatically with that. So they have the data available in a monthly form, in a quarterly form, and in an annual form as well. And behind that is a table. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to minimize this page. In fact, actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy the URL. Let's just copy that URL with Control C. I'm going to go into Excel. And let's just maximize that. And I'm going to go into the data tab here. And on the left-hand side here, we've got the get and transform data. So when I click on get data, Excel can pull in data from all sorts of different types of file, from live databases, from Microsoft Azure, from Power Platform, and other sources as well. We're going to use from web. There is actually a shortcut button here for from web as well. Okay, so we'll just let the wizard fire up. We know that Excel is going to be pulling data from the web. So the first thing it's going to ask us is, where on the web is this data coming from? And we've got a box here, URL. Now I've just copied the URL from the Office for National Statistics. I'm going to Control V and paste that in there and click OK. Now what Excel is going to do now is go to that page and analyze the data that is on that page and see, can I find some data that I can use? So we'll just give it a moment while it does that. It's connecting. Here we go. It's now analyzing the page. This is in real time, so you're getting a feeling for how long this takes. Okay, so Excel is now connected to the page, and it's picked up a number of different sources of data that could be usable. So let's start at the top and work down. Table 1. Okay, so that is literally just 2 cells of information. That's not what we're after. Let's click on table. Now this looks a bit more like what we're looking for. So we've got here in this table 1989, 1990. This is the year data. And then down here, we've got the quarterly data in the same table. And if I scroll down a bit more, you'll start to see here are the years and months. This is the data that we are after. So I'm now going to click the transform data because I don't want to load this straight into my spreadsheet. I want to do some work on this so that it's in a format that's presentable and repeatable as well. So let's click on transform. Now, when we click on transform, this opens up the Power Query interface. So Excel's just analyzed the data that's there. It's now opening up Power Query. And basically what Power Query Editor is like a light format Excel interface. So there's a number of tabs across the top here. We're on the Home tab now. So you can remove rows and so forth. You can keep rows. You can sort data. You'll see the purpose of these in a moment. If I click on Transform, we've got the options here to transpose data, replace data, create charts and formatting and work with all sorts of different types of data as well. When we add columns, we can add columns that are based on formulas and so forth. So there is a million videos on YouTube where you can get information about Power Query, but I'm going to show you just this one example today. And in our future episodes, we'll look at some other ways that we can use it. So let's think about this data. What do I really want to know? Well, I'm not really interested in the 1900s, the inflation. So I'm going to filter this data down so it only shows me this current century. So from here, I'm just going to click on the little arrow at the top of this column, and it brings up something I'm familiar with, which is the filter column. I'm going to use the text filters here, and I'm going to say my data begins with, I'm not interested in anything that starts with 19. So I'm going to change that. Here's my wizard here. So it begins with, and I'm going to put 20. But I want the quarterly data. That's more important to me than the monthly. So I'm going to say and contains, and I'm going to put the letter Q in there. So we're going to filter the data down to only see anything that begins with 20 and contains the letter Q, and click OK. Brilliant. So that's done that for me here. And on the right-hand side here, you'll see there are steps. And what Power Query is a way of recording steps that formats or modifies or calculates data, and so that you can make these steps repeatable for other data in the future. That's great. So I'm going to rename my column here from period. And I'm going to change that now to the word here, quarter. And I'm going to rename the column name value. And I'm going to change that to inflation percentage. Enter. Okay. So on the right-hand side here, I've got a couple of steps here. I've got the filtered rows. And this is the query that was created. So text starts with 20 and text contains Q. And I've renamed the columns. So I've renamed column period to quarter and the one called value to inflation percentage. That's great. Now let's click the close and load button and to pull this data into my Excel worksheet. Just give it a moment while it does this. Okay, that's great. So I've now got my data. So this is quite useful. You'll notice actually it's formatted it with a design, so I can change that design if I want to. The reason it's done that is because it's created a table, and we'll cover tables in a future session. But you'll see here that this data now sits quite nicely inside my Excel spreadsheet. And when I click in these rows, these are just values that have been formatted here. Now, if I go to the data menu, you'll see here there's a couple of buttons that you need to be aware of. So, for example, here, there is a button that says refresh all. That tells Excel to go back to the original source, bring the latest data, perform the steps that we just recorded in Power Query, and represent it. So if I click on refresh all, it's loading data on the right-hand side here. You'll see 98 rows loaded, and there's our data here. Okay. Now, let me just show you one final little tip here in Excel, which kind of works nicely with this. I want to, first thing I want to do, first of all, actually, I'm going to modify this because I don't need to see right back to 2000, before 2020, really. So I'm going to double click on my data here on the right-hand side. I'm just going to edit my query in my steps. Here we go. So on the filter step here, I'm going to change the query so it doesn't just begin with 20, but it begins with 202. So anything in the 2020s. Click close and load. Give it a moment, and you'll see, here we are. It's now done the analysis for us, and now we're only showing the quarters in the last few years. Now, I mentioned this is a table. If I press Tab on the final cell, it inserts a new row like it does in Word. Let's speculate what Q3 data is going to be. Let's say it's going to jump up to 6%. Okay. Now, we talked about the refresh all button. When I click refresh all, what that will do, you'll notice that my Q3 line has disappeared because that's not in the original data. Okay. Let me now just show you one final tip here, and that's around something called quick analyze. And again, you can use this feature in any Excel sheet, but it works really well with data like this. I'm going to select my table like so, and I'm going to press the Control Q button on the keyboard, but you could use this little button here that is always in the bottom right corner of a selection, quick analyze. Control Q, it brings up a small wizard. And from here, I can create, for example, a chart, or I can summarize the totals. So I'm going to bring up a chart here. Let's bring up interestingly, it gave me the option earlier on around a lined chart. I'm not quite sure why it's not showing that now. But let's bring here this type of chart. So again, this is very good. So I can see here now, here's a bit of a graph here showing me the visuals of how inflation's changed over the last few years. And let me just to show how this works, if I add in that Q3 speculative figure again, let's say it's going to be 7% this time, you'll notice that that's added that into my chart as well. Now, I can save this workbook and open it whenever I need to, and the data will automatically refresh when I open the sheet, and it will make sure I've always got the latest data. So when I click refresh here, you'll notice my speculative number has been removed from the chart. Okay, so time's up. Let me stop my share. We've spent half an hour there having a quick whiz through many Excel functions. There are many, many more, and there's lots of information on the internet to help you find more around navigating around Excel, keyboard shortcuts, manipulating data. So in part 2, which, like I said, will be in a few months' time, we'll start to dive a bit deeper into Power Query and around some of the analysis and forecasting tools that are in Excel. But I really hope this has whetted your appetite for digging into Excel, finding out more about it. There's lots of good sources on the internet, especially on YouTube, of training material to help you get the very best. Don't just rely on what PS Tech tell you, even though it is accurate. But there's lots of other information out there. So really hope that's whetted your appetite to make better use of Excel. We're taking a break over August. I hope you're going to get a nice break as well. So our next Lunch and Learn will be in September. Look out for the email from us with the invitation. It'll be on social media as well. And we'll also let you know in our next monthly newsletter when today's recording will be on YouTube, which will be hopefully in a few days' time. So it's been a real pleasure to see you all. I wish you all the best over the summer period. Take care.